Okay, hello my friends. My name is Gerdes. It is Monday, October 28th, and here's the daily brief for today. So 680 Russians are off the battlefield day over day. 7 tanks, 40 armored fighting vehicles, 51 artillery systems, 100 vehicles and fuel tanks. This fighting is intense. 1680 is almost record kind of numbers. Records got into the 1700s just twice to my knowledge, maybe 3 times. 690. We're almost at 700,000 by election day for the U.S. That's next week. It's November 5th. By November 5th, you'll be easily toward 700,000 losses for Russia. It's just shocking. Okay, 66 of 100 UAVs shot down by Ukrainian air defense this night. Military reports that 24 drones were locationally lost. 4 more flew back toward Russia or Belarus, but others were shot down or electronic warfare took them down. Okay, this is the British Defense Intelligence update. Russian forces have made gains into the heavily contested town of Chasiv Yar in eastern Ukraine. They have highly likely crossed the canal in southern Chasiv Yar and approached the town's boundaries. In the central part of the canal district, it's likely Russian forces have made limited advances west of the canal into the eastern part of Chasiv Yar. However, it's highly likely that the central and northern parts of the canal district are fiercely contested, and they've used the geography of the canal as where they're going to set up their fortifications, and it makes it hard for the Russians to cross. So, but the Russians keep pushing, and this is why you see the level of casualties that you see. And it's not just there, it's in other places. Now, where else are Russians pushing? With Ukraine still forbidden by the U.S. from striking Russian airfields with Western weapons, Russians are scaling up guided bomb strikes on Ukraine's civilian population to a new record every week. This morning, a 9-year-old child among the victims after Russians targeted a residential building full of sleeping families in Kharkiv. Several buildings have been completely destroyed, 13 victims with rescue efforts ongoing. This week's 1,100 guided bombs strikes is double the weekly average from 6 months ago. So it's been getting hot. I've been telling you that, but it's not just the battlefield and the casualties there. They're ramping things up all along the line. Including with civilians. Double the strikes from a weekly average from 6 months ago, 3 times the number of strikes from 1 year ago. So that's where they are. Now, on the front line, Ukrainian and Russian forces both advanced within the main Ukrainian salient in Kursk Oblast. So some are advancing here, some are advancing there. And then Russian forces advanced near Seldov and northwest of Vuhledar. Ukraine pushed forward in Kursk Oblast while Russia gains ground near Vuhledar. Meanwhile, geolocated footage shows Russian forces raising their flag over 2 key administrative buildings in eastern Ukraine. Again, the Russians are on the move. They keep pushing forward, but they're paying dearly for it. Okay, overnight, Ukrainian drones struck 2 distilleries. Now, when they first started hitting distilleries, I was like, why? Now we know. And some people in the comments put, well, they can also make chemicals for war in a distillery. And sure enough, that is what the news reports started showing. So Ukrainian drones struck 2 distilleries in Russia's Voronezh region, according to Central Intelligence Directorate. Russia repurposes such factories for rocket fuel production. And here's another view of this. The distilleries are involved in producing fuel and explosives for military purposes. Another view of the ethanol spirit distillery. Okay, and you get the idea. Now, I don't know what this is, a shopping center in the same city, but doesn't look like anything like around the pictures that we were seeing earlier, so I don't know that it's related. Okay, around 30 explosions were heard overnight in occupied Crimea, according to local residents. Approximately 20 blasts occurred in Zankoy district and another 8 in Simferopol. Okay, so that's what's happening there. President Zelensky submitted a draft law to the Verkhovna Rada, that's their Congress or their parliament, to extend mobilization and martial law in Ukraine another 90 days. They have to do this every 90 days. This is by law. This is something that they need to accomplish just to be legal. Okay. Now, I thought this was interesting. I keep reading about how oligarchs are unhappy or oligarchs know something's wrong with Putin's regime and that sort of thing. Here's General Ben Hodges. He was a former general in NATO in Europe. Russian elites know that they're losing. So here's Timoshenko saying, quote, "Even in a nightmare, we could not have predicted what the special military operation would lead to." Okay, that's a quote. Now remember, 3 days they're going to be in. They're bringing their dress uniforms so they can be on parade as soon as they mop things up. 3 weeks maybe to take the country, and here we are, 970-ish days later, something along those lines. Okay, Colonel General Baronet says, quote, "Belousov is talentless. Our aviation has collapsed and Ukrainian drones control the skies." Well, I hope he's right about that, but Belousov isn't talentless. He's gone after lots of corruption. Another officer of the Russian Defense Ministry has been arrested for bribery. According to investigators, former head of the communications department stole more than $100,000. In 2022, he was already sentenced to 4.5 years for embezzlement. In August this year, he was released. He testified against deputy head of the Russian General Staff, Vladimir Shamarin, in a corruption issue. And so these guys are just, there's like one after another, after another, after another. But that's what Belousov's prime function seems to have been, is to go after Russian generals and arrest them for corruption. Okay. Now, this is the big story that you've been waiting for. This was the theme, or the on the tile, on the thumbnail, and in the title. Moscow telegram channels report that the sewage system in Moscow broke down. So there's a fountain, the height of a residential building, of nothing but sewage, of poop, basically. I mean, that's what this is. This is raw sewage streaming into the air. Now, it looks like it's pretty high, and from this angle, you would think that it's high, and I believe that that's so. So let's look at it from another angle, looking down on it, because I don't want people to think like I'm just making this up and saying like, yeah, it's really tall when it's not. This is another angle, and compared to the building, I'm thinking that's a pretty big stream of poop. So part of the problem here is that they're in a system where they're not spending on the maintenance where they need to be spending on maintenance, because many things are diverted over to the Ukraine front, and things like this tend to break down. But it's almost like a metaphor of some sort. Okay, meanwhile, here's another stream of poop. This is Alexander Dugin. He's saying that Russia is an empire. It is natural for it to expand. We Russians will not rest until we put the whole planet under our protectorate. That is why we are being called a God-bearing nation. Okay, now that's not what your average Christian in America is talking about when he's talking about, God-fearing nation or something like that. It's not God-bearing, God-fearing. It's like they want to believe in God and love their neighbor and that sort of thing in the U.S. kind of scenario. In this, God-bearing nation means that everything's going to come under Russia, under God, Russia, everything else. That's what he's talking about here. And so this is very similar. If you're familiar in the West, and I know most of my viewers are either American, English, British, Canadian, Australian. That's 2/3 of my audience, right? So you would understand this. So King James in the 16-somethings was talking about how he's appointed by God to be the king. And why? Because he's the king. And it's almost like that, except it's not 16-something anymore. It's the 21st century, right? So, okay. That's what Alexander Dugin is talking about. Meanwhile, President Duda of Poland responds to mentions of Ukraine giving up territory in exchange for Russian promises. He says, quote, "If you are so generous to Russia, why not give her a piece of your country? Why should any sovereign country satisfy Russia? Let me ask, on what basis does Russia deserve anything, especially someone else's territory?" It's a good question. It's a legitimate question. Finally, Andrew Perpetua posted this on X. What barrel doing? It's supposed to look like this. All right, my friends, thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.